Hola, culers. Back again with our episode of Offside, which is Barca Football's video podcast on all things regarding Barca, sometimes about football and everything in between. Life being a cooler is not easy these days, as you can attest after watching the games. And while there's debate around whether we can end top four, or maybe that can be a challenge as well, there's a slight bit of hope around the Champions League, though all the interest is around who the next coach is going to be for Barca. Lots of names have been spoken about. You can hear about Hansi Flick learning Spanish. You can hear about De Zerbi being the right coach or the candidate for the job. There are calls for Xavi Alonso and many like that. But who would it be? So we are kickstarting a series where we'll be looking at each of these coaches in every episode. We'll try to analyze their styles, the way they play, and whether they will be a good fit for Barca. And in today's episode, the person we have chosen is Hansi Flick.
As you said, Barca are linked to essentially every elite and non-elite coach on the planet. That's how things go over in Catalonia. But yeah, Hansi Flick seems like the man, well, at least to me, seems like the most realistic option at this point. So according to all the reports or all the links, it seems that Hansi Flick is the most available one, if that makes sense. Whether he fits or not, we'll find out in this episode. But he does seem, to me at least, the front runner at this stage of the whole process of picking the next coach. So the way I would like to start this analysis actually is looking at Hansi Flick's structure and looking at the profiles of players that he likes to have in his team, right? So what you can see here on the tactics board is a very common 4-2-3-1 formation that Hansi Flick has used at Bayern when he was at Bayern. And what I've done here is I've written the player profiles, not the names that he used, although we'll get to them as well, but rather the profiles that he likes to have in his squad, right? So we can go one by one and see what they are all about. Obviously, this is a 4-3-3 formation, which has the line of four there, has the double pivot, has a roaming number 10, and it has a line of three in attack. Now, if we start with the goalkeeper, Hansi Flick wasn't necessarily the type of coach who utilized the goalkeeper as much. Yes, he was someone who would consolidate possession, but he was primarily someone who can be a sweeper, who can come out of the line, who can make those shot-stopping attempts, and who can actually play with the ball and connect with the players higher up in this far more vertical sense than we see at Barca necessarily. But he has to be able to be proficient, at least proficient, with the ball at his feet. But things get interesting when you go one line further, and we have a back line of four players here. We'll start with this left back over here. This is usually Alphonso Davies. As we know, that this is a player who's been highly developed and very proficient and very prominent during Hansi Flick's tenure at Bayern. And he is someone who will be the wing back. So he is someone who can start deep if needs be, but he is someone who will take charge of the whole flank and be the progressive runner on the left side of the pitch. What this means is that he is more a high presence than a low presence, as opposed to someone on the other side, on the fullback on the right, is this center back and a fullback hybrid. What this means is that this player right here, instead of being this high presence all the time, he will either stay as a part of the back line, so in a back three, or he will cut inside and go just slightly high up. So not as high as someone like a wing back on the left, but still can provide the overlap if necessary, but will mostly stay in this area right here, or be all the way down here as part of the three in the back system. Now, the center backs are both ball-playing center backs, but they do have different roles. One of them is more of a ball proficient or efficient center back, which means that he can make those short and short link-ups. He can make those passes into the first target that he sees, and he can break lines from the back. He is more comfortable with volume. He's more comfortable with stepping out, potentially even moving into midfield if necessary, and he's more comfortable with making the more difficult passes, such as breaking the lines into the half spaces, into the between the lines section to the roaming 10 and so forth. This one, the right one, not necessarily the right one, but the other one is someone who can also play on the ball, but is more concerned with going long diagonal balls into the runners, into the target man, and progressing play that way. So that's the difference between those two. Now, when it comes to these midfielders, they are different. So one of them will be the primary progressor and a deep line playmaker. What this means is this is the player that you look to in your first and second phases of play. This is the player that can drop deep. This is the player that can basically cover this whole area, and he can receive the ball from different angles. He can progress the ball calmly and under pressure. His partner, on the other hand, is someone who is comfortable with volume. He can recycle the ball, but he's much more of a physical presence, much more of a dueler, much more of a cover and a shield, right? Then we have the roaming 10. The roaming 10 is basically what it says. This is a player who's highly effective everywhere in the final third. He can go forward, he can go left, he can go right, he can even go deep if necessary. This is probably the fulcrum of this team, someone who not only has the individual quality, but has the cultural swing, the aura, if you will. Now, the wingers are very similar. They are ideally someone who can hold with and also cut inside. So they are both two-way wingers. They can go both ways. But the thing is, they will start high and start wide, and then they will tuck inside once Bayern start attacking. Now, number 9, this was Lewandowski, and we have Lewandowski still now, but we have a different Lewandowski. This Lewandowski used to be a much more complete player. He was very proficient, very lethal in the box. He would score heaps of goals, but he was also someone who was very involved. So he would drift wide. He would make those triangles on the flanks with his fullback, with his winger, with his number 10, but he would also drop deep, and he would drag markers, and he would do the link up quite well. So this is a very basic framework that Hansi Flick worked with at Bayern. And this is a team that was very high quality. It had quality across the board, but Hansi Flick utilized it to the best of his abilities. So this would be the framework that he would like to work with at Barcelona. Now, does he have that at Barca? Dev, any initial points or thoughts about this structure?
Yeah, just a couple. It's not that Xavi does not play 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-2-1. He does. He has. But then there will be those questions of Barca DNA and everything that will come through. The way Flick's teams play, they're very fast, possession-oriented, but depending mostly on transitions and quick counters, which is not probably how Barca play. Do you think that's going to be a problem based on just how the media entorno is around Barca?
I think Flick is more positional than giving credit. I think I would start with that. But yes, he is vertical in the sense that he doesn't really appreciate the midfield dynamics as much, right? So that's a very close comparison to Xavi, right? Xavi was the same. He was about finding the space and exploiting the space as fast as possible. Flick is very similar. He is fine and comfortable with skipping whole phases to exploit that space. And I think that will happen. And he's someone that will rely on the athletic nature of his players, on runners, especially on these flanks, to get out and to get out quickly. So yes, I think if Barca are expecting someone with the Barca DNA, this is not someone like that. Is this a positional coach? I think that Flick has the attacking dynamics that will please Barcelona, the Eterno and the fans, but at the same time, he may not be what the romantic side of our fanboy nature would like it to be. So that is the thing. If we were to draw parallels between Flick's Bayern and Barca, to the current Barca team, how would we stack up? So this is what I've come up with. Now, obviously, some of these players won't be here once Flick or whoever it is comes in next summer. Some of these players will be sold. Some maybe new players will come in. So that's something to consider. That's something that we cannot really predict for certain, but we have to work with what we have just now. Now, there are some profiles here that match perfectly, but there are some profiles that I feel like are missing, right? So first of all, I've put a question mark here on the second pivot, who's meant to be the Goretzka or the Thiago Alcantara alternative. Barca don't really have that. They have Romeo, but I don't think Romeo will last beyond this season. They could have someone like Gavi next to De Jong potential. That could work. But at the same time, I feel like Flick, if he was to take over, he would want someone a little bit different. Someone who could actually free De Jong, free Gavi, and let them be the Kimmich of this team. So let them be the player who's going to drop deep and be the progressor and be this very prominent face of the first and second phase of Barcelona's attack. Because Kimmich does that. He drops deep, he distributes the ball, and De Jong does it as well. Gavi can do it as well. But then if he does that, if he's down there, who's going to be up here and be the recycler, be the shield, be the support, and maybe be the more physical presence in this midfield, because Barca don't really have that player. When it comes to the other options, Christensen and Kubarsi are types of players who could replicate Alaba's influence. They could be ball-playing centre backs. I could see that happening. Maybe not at the highest of levels like Alaba was back then, but they could replicate that to a certain extent. Balde and Davies, this is a very close match. Davies has more potential up front, but Balde is definitely the profile that fits what Flick would want his left back to do in this scenario. Be this presence, this progressive carrier from deep and finish high. Now, on the other side, Koundé and Cancelo, I feel like they do mimic Pavard real well. Koundé especially, I'm not sure if he stays beyond this season, but he is someone that can be the center-back, full-back hybrid. So someone who doesn't necessarily overlap, but someone who will stay here or maybe go here and distribute the ball from there and link up with these players in his vicinity, or potentially even send balls into the final third, into the box. Now, the number 10 is interesting. We've spoken about this a lot. Pedri has the quality to do that, but he doesn't have everything just yet. He's not been as influential in this role as maybe Xavi would want him to be, as maybe we would like him to be. Gundogan could be. He has that eye for the space, for the goal, the ball striking, the movement. He has that. Maybe he would be the Miller of this team. Now, the flanks are interesting. Lamine fits. Rafinha also could fit. They're both someone with eyes for goal. Ferran and Fati would replicate Gnabry. They are the type of inverted forwards, maybe second strikers type of thing, where they cut inside but then exploit the space up front. And then we come to the number 9 role, which is a problem because Barca don't have a complete 9. They have someone like Lewandowski, who's not really what he used to be. They have someone like Roque, who's not a complete 9. He's more of a poacher, but not a complete 9. And Flick would love a complete 9. So this is what I see at the moment. Again, transfers will change this picture.
Probably agree with you on most of the stuff. My only question was, in your initial framework, you probably didn't position Gavi as a person right there. But I do think that this team without Gavi just doesn't function. Just psychologically, I don't think they function for whatever reason that might be. But what if De Jong was the 10? What if we thought about putting him there? Because if you see what Muller does, right? Muller is extremely smart, but he's also an incredible workhorse. Can Gundogan be an exact Muller? Probably no, right? So who would be a more Muller placement, for the lack of a better word? And yes, of course, as you said, a lot of them might not be there beyond this season. So we don't know what will happen. But given where we are, we'd love to know that.
De Jong definitely has the final pass. He has the athletic prowess. So he's someone who can actually do a lot of things in almost every phase of the game, right? So I don't think it's a very crazy thing to say that to have De Jong up there, or even Gavi, because Gavi replicates that as well. He has the intensity and the energy there to be like Müller, and he also exploits and reads space really well. So I think both De Jong and Gavi could be an option there. And also Pedri and Gundogan could replicate De Jong's influence. And theoretically, you could make this switch and not lose too much. Would you gain the same? I don't know, because I don't think if De Jong and Gavi have Miller's attacking proficiency, maybe not, because Miller was about space. He was about smart movement and link up. And back then, he was also working really hard. And one other aspect of Muller is that he's someone who actually carries a team similarly to Gavi, only much, much, much more. He's someone who's very vocal, someone who is very, I don't have the word for it really, but he is
the soul. He's the soul of that Bayern team.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
He's the face. He's the face of that team.
Exactly. And he's a cult icon. He's someone who just carries them, as I said. So I think, and that was also off the ball and on the ball and off the pitch. So in every single imaginable aspect, Muller was someone like that. Gavi can be someone like that. The only thing is, I'm not exactly sure he can replicate this deadliness that Muller has. Perhaps he could, as he develops. He's very young. He's still at the very beginning of his career, so maybe he could. So maybe this role wouldn't be as much of a goal-scoring role, or I don't know, the space exploiting role that Muller had, but it would be something akin to that. Maybe not at the highest of levels, but I think there is something to explore here. Gavi certainly has it in him. We spoke about Gavi a lot He can have an influence deep, but also very high up. And that's a fair point, Dev. Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, the third slide and the third tactics board will be a short overview of Flick's principles of play and possession, right? So I've listed them all here so we can have an eye on them. And these are some of the most common things that we see Flick do or Flick's team do. Now, obviously, I cannot list all of them. And Flick is someone who does like dynamics in attack, someone who will let his players sometimes do something out of nothing because he had that differential quality in Miller, he had that differential quality in Lewandowski, and he had very proficient players there. I've not listed their names because sometimes they differ, but it doesn't matter because the principles of play have to stay intact regardless of the names. We'll start with the number 6, dropping deep and distributing. This is something that we see almost all the time. Usually it's Kimmich, it can be Thiago, it can be someone else. But usually what happens is Bayern have this rotation when they have someone from the midfield, from the double pivot, drop deep and establish this 3 at the back system where we know this. Xavi does this as well with De Jong, and De Jong replicates this perfectly because now all of a sudden you have 3 players here that combat or outnumber most of defenses, most of the presses, or at least, at the very least, force the opposition to put more players up front, and that gives them the chance for this player to drop in here, for example, and overload this area and progress the ball. Now, this is a very common thing, and this player right here will start deep. He can go a bit forward. He can carry the ball from the back line, and then he can combine with the players up front. He can send balls here. He can send balls to the flanks, or he can just combine in tight spaces and progress the ball that way. Now, the center backs, we already mentioned this. One is very combinatory. The other is very direct. But if Bayern are vertical, and they are, or they were under Flick, it all starts with the center backs. They have the ball playing capabilities to send balls directly here in this channel right there. So between the lines for the number 10, who is Miller, to exploit, who moves across this final third, and he is someone who needs to be in the right place at the right time to get this ball, control the ball, and progress the play, or rather give the team this target, this passing lane higher up the pitch. From this center back, usually this is what happens. The ball goes, cuts the lines, through the lines, and gets to the target. From this center back, you find the runners, you find players with diagonal balls who will exploit the space and receive in this very high and in a very direct manner inside the box or close to the box, and then immediately attack. The left back is also an option here. If the ball is with the left back, he will try, or rather his task will be to run with the ball and progress play that way, and then combine with his wingers and combine with the number 10, which kind of brings me to the next one, which is wide connections. Bayern were all about attacking the flanks under Flick. Flick was very wide area oriented, and he would do these triangles with players. So the number 10, the winger, and the fullback would often combine, and they would often try and get the rest of the team on that side of the pitch. You guessed it, for the overload to isolate. They would focus there, switch the flanks, have a 1 versus 1 with the other runner, and then attack the space that is now freed up. A very basic principle, again, something that Barca and Xavi do often. And I think that Flick would also love to do more of that at this Barcelona if he had the right profiles, which, again, does he have that? We'll see in the summer. But at the moment, I think that he would love to be able to utilize something like this at Barcelona. Now, there's also an option to have a target man here, and then one of the center backs would actually go long. As we said, they like to do that. They would go long, and they would send the ball to the target man, to Lewandowski, who could win this first duel, aerial duel, whatever it is, and he would lay the ball off to this roaming 10, or maybe the fullback who's cutting inside, and Bayern would have a lot of players close or near to this first duel in order to win the second ball and progress the ball that way. So you see, he is a coach that likes to combine verticality and also some positional play. But if he can see the space, if he has the options and the profiles, he will not be afraid to skip play and go very fast and very direct. But as we see with number 6, with Kimmich, for example, he can make these positional plays, make the overloads, and then try and progress through the 6, through the inverted right back, and be much more systematical in his approach. Once Bayern are in the final third, they will bombard forward. They will make a line of 5 players usually, and they will have a 3-2-5 or maybe 2-3-5 depending on the situation. Very high back line, and this rest defense will usually be a line of 2 and line of 3, or a line of 3 and a line of 2, which can be a bit inconsistent, I have to say. He is someone who will keep this compact. This area has to be compact. It has to be close together. But this is something that Flick often struggles with. It's something that he doesn't really do often enough or reliably enough. And I think this is something to consider. And also, he relies on the athletic nature of his players a lot. So these players need to be ready to to go back, track back, be physical, be hardworking. And that's also true for his defensive side of things, which I will talk about next.
Xavi and Flick are similar kind of coaches in the way they think about the game or the way they want to play the game. But obviously, there's a marked difference in the way their team actually plays. So it's not that Xavi doesn't want to do these things. He does. But Barca seldom actually pull it off on the pitch these days. Whereas with Flick, it was like a well-oiled machine. You'd see this consistently, and then they would just dominate and dominate. My only question is, formations aside, what would be the reason for that? Is it because Flick coaches better? Or did he have better players? Or is there something else? Xavi's team, with the same kind of thinking philosophy, not perform anywhere close to this when we actually see them play on the pitch. But how does Flick get that done?
That's a fair question. And yes, it's actually very true, because on paper, Xavi would love to be able to play positional football. He would love for his ideas to go through and be flawless in execution, but for some reason they are not. You mentioned player quality. This Barca team is not a bad team. I don't think in the slightest that it's a bad team. However, this Bayern team, the one that we saw earlier in the profiles, that was an elite team. That was a team that was stacked. And I think that's very much a part of why Flick was good. But then again, Niko Kovac, who was there before Flick, had the exact same team, failed miserably. So I feel like the parallels between Flick and Xavi are there. Both are coaches that are a sum of their parts type of coaches. Flick and Xavi can do wonders with a great team, but I think Flick has a much clearer game model. He gives instructions, not suggestions. He's much more of a man manager. He's much more intense in training. All of those things make him a better coach than Xavi at this moment. Whether that comes true, whether that's true once he takes over Barca, because that's a different animal altogether. Maybe that doesn't really transform perfectly, but he is very much someone who will take what he has and he will do what he's meant to do with that unit. He had a great set of players and he played great football. At Barca, he has not elite, but he still has good to great players. So I feel like he can play good to great football. Can he be a world beater? I think that would be overperforming in his regard. He could do it, but I wouldn't really expect him to move mountains with this Barca team. If he adds certain players, if he completes the jigsaw, potentially yes. But at the moment, I don't think so. But what he does have, again, he has that clear game model. He gives instructions. He knows what his players need to do, and he gets them to do those things. And he's a great man manager. From all the interviews that I've seen and read, and what I have read about Flick, all the players are in unison. They all say he's a great man manager. And he has that on the training pitch and on the actual games to prove that. And I feel like if that translates to Barca, he can do more than Xavi could have done or did with this Barca side. Our fourth scenario will be the defensive scenario. It's very German. It's very, very standard stuff. But at the same time, there are some points that I would like to mention here. So Flick, generally, he had Bayern pressing really high, pressing really intensely, as we can see there. So high intensity, high press. And generally speaking, it will be man-oriented. So you can see here on the pitch that these players all have their markers. The key component here is that he had this Bayern team running. He had them working really hard at all times, especially from the first line, which, again, could be an issue with Barcelona. And he did have some clever mechanisms, like he would use cover shadows really well. So these wingers would press one player, but at the same time, they would also use their cover shadow to keep this other player in line behind them to block the passing lanes. But all of this was very dependent on athletic power. And I feel like Xavi was the same before he moved to Barcelona, back when he was in Qatar. He would have this high press, but that high press was very much founded on the athletic power, especially on the fullbacks, who would have to storm up and down the pitch depending on the situation. And they had to have that in them almost every single week, right? But this Barca side may not be drilled or built that way yet. But at the same time, Flick had a high emphasis on training, had a high emphasis on drilling those things into his players. So maybe if he can improve that at Barcelona, he can improve what Xavi has been doing, and maybe there's hope. Athleticism, high press, high intensity in the middle line. The people will collapse on their markers. This is where the highest intensity would be. So if the ball goes there, all of these players would just collapse as fast as they could. And one other thing, he would ensure that his backline was never really outnumbered. He would have at least a 3 versus 3 at the very least. Usually it would be +1 in the backline off the ball, which is very important. And he also had players who could track back, who could be this high line defenders if needs be. And that can be a problem, but also it's unavoidable with this type of pressing and with the in-possession football that he likes to play. It's not something very innovative, not something that we've never seen before. And in theory, it's something that Barca would like to do. But the question remains, do they have the players? Is Flick going to implement the type of coaching and training grounds to make this a valid approach for Barcelona?
We saw the tactics. Now, what we want to do is to see how the numbers stack up against this. So what we did was we took Flick's 2 seasons at Bayern and we compared those numbers with Xavi's 2 seasons at Barca. And we saw some good numbers, some interesting stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in. So let's start with comparing the attack over 2 seasons across both the coaches. We're talking about squad XG, non-penalty XG, and assists. And on the right, you have squad build-up and progression. On the bottom, goals and assists per 90, and then XG and XA per 90. Just cursory look from a attacking perspective, the numbers that we care about, XG, squad XG, overall per 90 XG, what does better? They create more, their per 90 output is better than Xavi's, and so on. Even their goals and assists are higher than what Xavi has been able to recreate at Barca. However, when you come to possession, which is basically progressive carries and progressive passes, I would say Xavi did actually better, right? So that's not going to probably change, or it might be because I think fundamentally Barcelona's players are drilled to play like that. So obviously those numbers, I think his Bayern numbers can be improved when he comes to Barcelona because he'll get players who are used to playing that way, or used to doing that. But from an attacking perspective, I think it's a bit of both. I don't think it's just that he's a more attacking coach than Xavi. I think his game plan, as you said, very clear, right? Very instructive, very prescriptive, more than suggestive, right? I think that works. Will he get that kind of finishing capability at Barca? I doubt he will get that much. But if he can even lift between 2.43 and 1.83, whatever the gap is, or between 82.7 and 69.45 from a squad perspective in a whole year and a whole season of La Liga, that's the difference that we are looking at from an attacking perspective. I also wanted to see each person evolution across 2 seasons. So if you look at Flick's, and I've taken Flick 2019 and 2020, that's when he was at Bayern, right? So if you look into it, progressively, if you look XG, NP, XG, and XAG, they fell season to season. So the first season was when Bayern won Champions League. We got that 8-2, which we will never forget. And then the next season, they won Bundesliga. They didn't win the Champions League. But you can see the XG falling, right? Corresponding, if you look at Xavi, he's actually improved from season 1 to season 2, right? Things actually went better. Now, it also mostly because we got new players coming in, like Lewandowski came in. And so we had a new attack. There was some money that was invested. So obviously, some of that is the efforts bearing that fruit. But it also showcases that he was able to improve on that. Whereas Flick really had a stacked team, but that actually fell. And that was something that I found really interesting. Again, if you look into build up play, it actually regressed for Flick across the 2 seasons. Whereas for Xavi, it actually improved.
Think this kind of goes to show that we're sometimes very harsh on Xavi as well. He has a team that is obviously lacking at certain fronts, and I feel like there's something missing from Xavi and the squad at the same time. I'm not sure what happened with Flick. Did he lose players? I think Bayern in that period started really missing in the market as well, not really addressing some of the things that had to be addressed as well. And I feel like that's haunting them today. And so is Barcelona, right? So when you have a problem in a team and you don't address it, it becomes an even bigger problem over time.
Flick's team actually regressed across all these parameters from season 1 to season 2. Whereas Xavi actually did better if you look at all the data. And then that just continues across most of these parameters that we have been talking about. I also wanted to look into transfers, because of 2 reasons. One, Barca won't have billions of dollars to go and spend in the market. So I wanted to understand, how did Flick do his transfers? How many were loans? How many were academy players? How many were free transfers? And so on and so forth. And then try to compare that with what Xavi has done over the 2 years. And this is how it looks like. So if you look into bought and sold, bought less, sold less, Xavi bought more, sold a little more. But I think more or less they're balanced out in terms of how much they spent in the market and how much they sold to make space for that. He had 5 free transfers, 4 from loans, and 5 from academy that he brought into the team. Now, I like this because he possibly tries to look into that to see, okay, are there good academy candidates who can, and we need that. We need that in a coach who will come in, who will go for the academy, who will give them space, who will give them time and place to, be in the team. Xavi obviously is much more because I think his hands were just forced. We could only do free transfers and loans and academy, but that's something that I wanted to look into. So again, not much to differentiate, but definitely not a coach who needs a lot of financial outlay in the market. And that is also critical because he's not going to get that kind of money in Barca. It's just not going to happen. Any thoughts, Sonia, before I move into the defensive aspects?
Not much, but yeah, you're right. It's also, as I said, Bayern already had a great team, so maybe it wasn't necessary to buy as much. And of course, at Barcelona, we were forced into the situation of free transfers, loans, and academy players a bit more. Of course, yes, it is also Xavi appreciating the youth, but it's also Xavi being forced to use the youth. And we'll see. It's good to see that Flick can also work with a set parameter, with limited market activity.
So now there's the comparison and then there's the evolution. Here's how they compare. If you look into squad blocks, intercepts, and perception and all of that, again, very similar. Not too much of a difference from that perspective. If you look into challenges like dribbles being tackled and so on, that's where I think Flick's team was better. So how we use those people into breaking those counters, into breaking those attacks, I think that's critical. And then Barca had to do a lot more clearances, which means they were facing a lot more counters or a lot more attacks, which is why they had to do those clearances, right? So probably had a better rest defense than Xavi had. And then his errors were almost half of what Barca does. So unlike what people say, probably he does have a defensive mindset, at least based on the numbers. It seems like that there are specific focus areas that they go upon and work on, given that I am measuring that amazing Barca defense from last year, right? Which was the title winning defense. So that those numbers are in here. And still you can see there's not much to differentiate from that Bayern defense, even though people will say that, no, he's not a very defensive coach. But seems like he does put some importance and focus on that, while obviously he loves playing the attacking brand of football. If you look into the evolution between Flick and Xavi, more or less, again, his defense has held the same, but Xavi's has actually regressed. And what I found incredibly interesting is that it was more in the first year than it was in the second year when we actually won the league. We actually did most of the things lesser in the title winning year than we did in the year before. I think that consistency has been missing in Xavi. We can debate about whether we had a great defense or not, or what have you, that's separate. But from a consistency point of view, it would seem that it was a little bit different. Continuing on that, if you look, it actually improved for Flick. The defensive evolution actually improved over the 2 seasons. Not the same for Xavi, though. The numbers don't speak for that.
I think, yes, you're right. I think Flick is a much better defensive coach than people give him credit. I think everyone instantly thinks, oh, he's just attack, no defense. He's just about outscoring the opposition. But the thing is, I find his Bayern was quite solid defensively overall. Not flawless by any means, but quite solid. They had a clear principle. They knew what they had to do. They were coached to do so quite well. And there was also, of course, a big effort from the players themselves to actually achieve that. So there's context there that needs to be unpacked. Of course, there has to be. There always is. But on the face of it, and the numbers do confirm this, I feel like he's much better or much more solid defensively than we give him credit. And I hope that he can instill some of that at Barcelona as well.
All right. So we saw a little bit of the tactics and we saw a little bit of the data. Now, obviously, none of them completely will give a clear answer of whether Flick is the right coach or whether he will be the right choice for this Barca. That only time can tell. And we'll have to wait. If I have to give my personal opinion, I think, and I'll go with pros and cons, things that I like about Flick and things where I think maybe we should look at somebody else. Things I like about Flick: mentality. That steel mentality is there in him. And I think Barca need a person like that to come out of whatever funk they have been in. A cultural difference, right? This is a German guy who's coming in. And so there'll be a cultural shift, right? But I do believe that he has the potential to coach this team better. How much better? I won't be able to say, but better than what it is right now. Now, where I have concerns is that I do think that he can do great with great teams, but given the state of our team and how great they are mentally or physically, he won't be getting what he needs to be successful immediately. He just won't. Also, we have a bunch of kids. They will play a lot of games. Can you nurture them? Can you make them better than what they are? I think that's something that I don't know. I just don't know. So there I have some sort of a concern. And the concern will be just the cultural shift. It needs somebody who can manage that. So that's my biggest concern, whether it will be the right cultural fit, even though Laporta wants to bring the German school of football, and there's been a lot of talk about that.
The clear positives, obviously, as you said, mentality is one of them. And that is one big focus of his tenure, or was a big focus of his tenure at Bayern. And I would say a clear game model is a must for Barcelona. They need to know what they want to do and how they want to get there. That's a big positive for me. And Flick has that clear, instructive way of coaching. That I like that. I also like his man management. As I said, I think all the players have been very positive about their experience with Flick. That's big for our players, especially young ones. And the third one, from what I've seen, his public relation can be good. And he will have to have that at Barcelona. If he's to coach Barcelona, he needs to be able to combat, to battle, to fight the media, fight the entorno, and come out on top of that as well. So I think that's definitely a positive. Negatives, as you said, I think he's very kin to Xavi in certain aspects. So if we are expecting a departure from this style to a completely different one, I'm not sure we'll get that. Maybe we'll get more of the same, but more efficient. That's still a positive to me, but I think that's a possibility as well. He'll have a group of players and he won't exactly have free hands, free choice. Okay, I want this guy and that guy. Bring me this one, bring me that one. He won't have that. And if he cannot work with little and create a lot with that, there'll be a problem. I think that could be a big issue if he cannot get past that stumbling block. But this is our 2 cents on Flick for this week.
Yeah, those are our 2 cents. And this drama is not going to end till July. So this will continue happening and we will continue creating. So Vizca Barca. And to find out the next coach that we are going to profile, is it Nagelsmann? Is it Xabi Alonso? Is it Roberto De Zerbi? Tune in to find out.